and can confirm this is not a security vulnerability in a Google product. The attack presupposes a compromised password, and the actual vulnerability appears to lie in the fact that the telcos provide inadequate protection of their voicemail system. Please report this to the telcos directly. Regards, Jeremy. So Google blew him off and is still vulnerable, presumably, today.
Well, but you can remove the backup voicemail solution, which I just did. So,
and I would argue anybody who's got that turned on, who's worried about this, should turn it off, because Google does not have your back.
Yeah.
Google, everybody else, well, except Yahoo. Yahoo never responded. This hacker confirmed, he said Yahoo's main services, which allowed for two-factor authentication, were also vulnerable to the exploit I document above. In fact, the exploit to get into Yahoo accounts with two-factor authentication enabled is even more severe, as the attacker does not fully risk the victim knowing about account access to login. 14 days from disclosure, Yahoo still hasn't replied, and hence they are still vulnerable to the two-factor authentication bypass. So Facebook and LinkedIn did exactly what we would hope. Google blew it off and said, sorry, go talk to your telephone company. Of course, it's all the telcos in the world we're talking about, not, one.
Well, and some
and
do it better
Yahoo
than others. So.
Never responded.
Yeah.
So
you could turn off this in Google. I think Google, and I've said this for a long time, has a much bigger vulnerability. Even if you have two-step turned on, of course, because not everything supports two-factor authentication, they do application-specific passwords. If somebody got my application-specific password, until I revoke it can be used again and again. It's not my real password. It requires no second factor, and it can be just used all the time. It's not a one-time only password. Basically, those are very dangerous, those application-specific passwords. The only protection is I can revoke it, but in order for that to work, I have to know it was being used. Yeah. So I think that's a much bigger flaw. I mean, that's terrible. That's like 16 alphabetic characters, case-insensitive alphabetic characters. If somebody should see that or find that, then I'm really screwed.
Yep. So, also in the headlines, and I couldn't really understand this, except that it has the magic word in the headline. So the headline is, how to make and here's the magic word, quantum, random number generator from a mobile phone. And I realized quantum gets everyone excited, as if some exotic physics are in use. It's like, oh, quantum technology, nobody understands that. And so I wanted to say, okay, wait, let's have a little bit of a reality check here. Everyone who, especially our age, Leo, but I would imagine even younger kids, are all familiar with audio and hiss.
Yeah, you don't hear the digital, but the analog.
Right, and so hum and hiss have historically been the boogeyman of audio systems. Hum, that's essentially induction of 60 cycle noise, or 50 if you're in a 50 hertz area of the world, in which case it's and so, in the old days, you set up a really cool stereo system, or hi-fi, as we used to call it, and you turn up the volume, and the question was, what did you hear? Was there, well, that's frequency would change, they would get louder, and if so, you go around moving wires, and you rearrange things, and there were things like ground loops that caused this problem, and so there was a whole black art to getting the hum out of your stereo system, because you wanted to be able to really crank it up. But when you came to a quiet part of the song or between tracks, you didn't want to have this hum. The other thing that was also the bugaboo is there. And so, you know, hum is the pattern, and we perceive it as a pattern, therefore a tone. Hiss is toneless. It's white noise or pink noise, and, you know, they have different spectrums depending upon where, you know, like what is carrying it, but it is quantum noise. So anything that is hissy, anything that is noisy, you know, the static that, you know, was on the screen of Poltergeist, you know, that, you know, or after in the old days they would raise the flag, the jets would fly by, the station would go off the air at 2 a.m. and they go, that's quantum noise. So the reason that we use the term now is that we want computers always to add two numbers and get the same result. We want them to absolutely be unnoisy. And in fact, the whole change from analog to digital was essentially to get us out of the noise. That's what it was for. Instead of having signals that roamed around in value, where we had a problem with thermal drift and components aging and you know, power supply putting out different voltages, where the actual voltage itself, the variable voltage, carried the signal. We said, wait a minute, that we're going to come up with a system called digital, where we have amplifiers at every single stage. An AND gate, a NOR gate, a NAND, every one of those things is an amplifier. And at there's some small voltage range, normally around 0.7 or 0.8 volts, where when the input crosses that, the output slams all the way the other direction, from like 0 to 5. So right there is this massive amplification effect. And so essentially, this amplifies out the noise at every stage in a logical system. That's digital computing, is these amplifiers that they just squeeze out the noise so that there's no chance for any to come in. And in which case, obviously, we can no longer represent data with a variable voltage or a variable current, you know, anything analog. Now we approximate with a series of ones and zeros, which are you know, maybe 0 and 5 volts, or it turns out anything above 0.8 or below 0.8, meaning that the noise is completely ignored as long as it doesn't get near that threshold. And so digital systems are designed to keep us away from that noise threshold and give us perfect results. Perfect approximations as a function of how many bits we have quantized that analog value into. So this was all about using this article that I saw so many times, because everyone knows I'm interested in entropy, was the idea that a couple dollars worth of smartphone camera could produce an amazing amount of noise, which is not at all surprising, because the smartphone camera is now a grid of noise producers. Every single one of those little pixels on the camera is trying to be an analog receiver, an analog discriminator of photons coming in. But it is, because it's running in the analog domain rather than in the digital domain, it's going to be subject to noise. There will be, you know, random effects. And actually, in a dim environment where there aren't a lot of photons coming in, you're not sure whether a photon is going to trip it or not. And if it's actually counting photons, then you've got, again, a very good source of quantum noise. Now you multiply that by the size of these smartphones.